The dust cloud grew smaller and smaller until it finally disappeared over the hill. Rachel stood there on the old wooden porch, her hand still raised in a half-hearted wave even though she knew nobody was looking back anymore. That was it. The last truck. The last family. The last goodbye. She lowered her hand slowly and looked around at the empty landscape. The silence hit her like a wall. No kids playing in the distance. No dogs barking. No sound of tractors rumbling across the fields, just wind. Just endless empty wind whistling through the abandoned houses that dotted the valley. 5 years. That's how long it had taken for this place to die. Well, almost die. Because Rachel was still here, wasn't she? Standing on this same porch where her grandmother used to shell peas, where her father used to sit and watch the sunset after a long day's work. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She already knew who it was before looking. Mom, again. Rachel, please, just come stay with us for a few months. See how you like it. There's nothing left for you there. But that wasn't true. There was everything here. The land her great-grandfather had claimed and worked with his bare hands. The barn her father had built board by board. The old oak tree where she'd carved her initials when she was 7 years old. How could she explain that leaving would feel like betraying everyone who'd ever loved this place? She was 28 years old, and according to everyone who'd left, she was wasting her life. Maybe they were right. The drought had been brutal. 3 years without proper rain. The creek that used to run clear and cold was now just a dried-up scar across the land. Most folks had sold their cattle for whatever they could get. The ones who couldn't sell had watched them die. Rachel still had 15 head of cattle. 15 scrawny, stubborn survivors just like her. She hauled water for them every single day from the well that, thank God, hadn't run dry yet. It was backbreaking work. The kind of work that made her fall into bed at night too exhausted to even feel lonely. Except she did feel lonely. Terribly, achingly lonely. She walked down the porch steps and across the yard to the barn. Inside it was cooler, dimmer. Dust motes floated in the strips of sunlight coming through the gaps in the walls. This barn needed repairs. The whole ranch needed repairs, but repairs cost money, and money was something she had very little of these days. Her old truck needed new tires. The fence on the north side was falling apart. The roof of the house leaked in 2 places when it did rain, which wasn't often enough to worry about anyway. She kept a running list in her head of everything that needed fixing, and the list just kept getting longer. Sometimes late at night she'd lie in bed and wonder if she was being brave or just stupid. Was there really a difference? The nearest town was 40 miles away. She drove there every other week for supplies, and every time she saw more businesses closed, more windows boarded up. The hardware store had shut down last month. The diner where she used to get coffee was hanging on by a thread. Even the gas station looked like it might not make it through the winter. People in town looked at her with a mixture of pity and confusion. That girl from the valley who won't leave, that stubborn Hartfield girl. They'd stopped asking when she was going to sell. Now they just shook their heads and looked away. But Rachel had made a promise. Not to anyone else, but to herself. To the land. She would stay until the rains came back. She would stay until there was absolutely nothing left to stay for. She would not be the one to break the chain, to be the generation that gave up. Evening came as it always did, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Rachel sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the colors change. This was her favorite time of day, when she could almost pretend everything was normal. When the beauty of the sunset made her forget, just for a moment, how hard everything had become. She thought about her friends from high school. Most of them were married now, living in cities, posting pictures on social media of their apartments and their office jobs and their weekend brunches. They probably thought she was crazy. Hell, maybe she was. But when she looked out at this land, even dried up and struggling as it was, she felt something she couldn't explain. A connection. A belonging. Like the roots of that old oak tree, she was dug in deep, and pulling away would tear something essential inside her. The stars came out, one by one, filling the sky with light. Out here, with no city lights for miles, the stars were incredible. Thick as spilled salt across black velvet. She used to lie in the grass as a kid and try to count them until she fell asleep. Tomorrow would be another hard day. More fence to check, more water to haul, more hours of work that never seemed to make much difference. But tonight, right now, sitting on this porch under these stars, Rachel felt something that surprised her. Peace. Not happiness, exactly, Not contentment, but peace, the kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, even if it's hard, especially because it's hard. She finished her tea and stood up, her joints aching from the day's work. Inside, the house felt too big and too empty, but it was home. It had always been home, and she wasn't ready to let it go, not yet, maybe not ever. As she locked the door and headed to bed, she didn't know that everything was about to change. She didn't know that her solitary existence was about to be interrupted. She didn't know that just 3 miles north, someone else had decided to stay too, someone who, like her, was too stubborn to give up on a dream that everyone else called foolish. The land had been empty for so long that Rachel had stopped expecting anything different. But the land, patient and old and full of secrets, was about to surprise her. The alarm went off at 5 in the morning, same as always. Rachel reached over and slapped it quiet, then lay there for a minute staring at the ceiling. There was a new water stain up there, spreading slowly like a bruise. Add it to the list. She dragged herself out of bed and pulled on her work clothes, jeans worn soft from 1,000 washings, a flannel shirt with a tear in the elbow that she kept meaning to patch, boots that had seen better days but still had some life left in them. Just like everything else around here. The coffee maker sputtered and hissed, filling the kitchen with the only good smell the morning had to offer. While it brewed, Rachel stood at the window and watched the sun come up. Red sky in the morning. Her grandfather used to say that meant a storm was coming, but these days it just meant another hot, dry day stretching ahead. By 6 o'clock, she was out checking on the cattle. They gathered around her, hopefully, their big eyes sad and trusting. She'd named a few of them, even though her father had always said never to name an animal you might have to sell or eat. But out here, alone, she needed someone to talk to, even if they couldn't answer back. Morning. Betty, hey there, Rusty. Yeah, I see you. Troublemaker. She checked their water trough, already knowing what she'd find. Nearly empty. It was always nearly empty. She hauled bucket after bucket from the well, her shoulders burning with the effort. This was what her days looked like now. Hauling water. Fixing things that broke. Driving into town when she absolutely had to. Falling into bed exhausted. Repeat. The fence on the eastern pasture was worse than she'd thought. 3 posts were completely rotted through, and the wire was sagging so badly that a determined calf could probably push through. She spent 4 hours in the blazing sun digging out the old posts and setting new ones. Well, new was generous. They were posts she'd salvaged from the old Johnson place down the road, from people who'd given up and left. Lunch was a sandwich eaten standing up in the shade of the barn. She'd stopped setting the table months ago. What was the point of pretending when there was nobody to pretend for? Afternoons were usually spent on whatever crisis had appeared that day. Today it was the pump on the well making a grinding noise that it definitely shouldn't be making. She lay on her back in the dirt, squinting up at the machinery, trying to remember what her father had taught her about fixing these things. Counterclockwise to loosen, clockwise to tighten. Or was it the other way? She talked to herself a lot these days. Full conversations. Sometimes she'd catch herself and laugh, but it wasn't really funny. It was just what happened when you went weeks without talking to another human being. The pump took 3 hours and every curse word she knew to get working again. By the time she finished, her hands were covered in grease and her back was screaming at her. But it was running. That was a victory, small as it was. Around 4 o'clock, she sat on the porch with a glass of water and let herself rest for exactly 15 minutes. She'd started timing her breaks because otherwise she'd sit too long and think too much. Thinking was dangerous. Thinking led to doubting, and doubting led to questions like, what am I doing? And is this worth it? And how long can I really keep this up? She didn't have good answers to those questions, so it was better not to ask them. Her notebook sat on the small table beside her chair. She'd been keeping a journal since the day her parents left. At first, she'd written in it every day, long, detailed entries about her work and her feelings and her hopes. But lately, the entries had gotten shorter. More like a log than a diary. June 15th. Fixed fence. Hauled water. Hot, tired. That was it. That was her whole day in 6 words. She flipped back through the pages, reading entries from months ago. There was one from February that made her throat tight. Saw a coyote today near the North Ridge. Beautiful animal. We looked at each other for a long minute. I wondered if he was as lonely as me. Then he turned and trotted away. And I felt even more alone than before. Is it crazy that I wanted him to stay? That I almost followed him? This silence is starting to feel like a physical weight. Rachel closed the notebook quickly. Too much thinking. Too much feeling. She still had evening chores to do. The cattle needed another check. The chickens needed feeding. The garden, what was left of it, needed watering from her precious well supply. Everything was dying slowly, including her vegetable plants, but she refused to let them go without a fight. Dinner was pasta with sauce from a jar and some tired-looking carrots from the garden. She ate it while reading a book she'd already read 3 times before. The library in town was tiny, and she'd been through every Western and mystery novel on the shelves. Now she was just rotating through her favorites again. The evenings were the hardest, when the work was done and there was nothing left to do but sit with the silence. She tried watching the small TV, but the satellite signal was spotty, and most shows just made her feel worse. All those people living normal lives in cities, having friends, going out, laughing. It felt like watching a life she used to understand but couldn't quite remember anymore. Some nights she called her mom, but those conversations always went the same way. "How are you, honey?" "Fine, Mom, everything's fine." "You sound tired." "I am tired. But it's good tired." "Rachel, there's no shame in admitting when something isn't working." "It's working. Mom, I'm making it work." Then silence on both ends, because what else was there to say? They'd had this conversation 100 times. She wrote in her journal before bed. June 25th. Hot again. Well, pump acting up, fixed it. Alone is starting to feel normal. Not sure if that's good or bad. Sometimes I forget what it's like to have a real conversation. I talk to the cattle more than people. Betty's a good listener, though. Tomorrow, more of the same. Always more of the same. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak around her. Every sound was familiar now. The window that rattled in the wind. The floorboard that squeaked near the bathroom. The way the whole structure seemed to sigh at night, like it was tired too. Rachel thought about her grandmother who'd lived in this house for 60 years. Had she ever felt this alone? Had there been nights when she wanted to give up? Or had it been easier back then, when the whole valley was full of families and neighbors and community? Sleep came slowly, the way it always did now. And when it came, she dreamed of rain. Great sheets of it, falling from a dark sky, soaking into the thirsty earth. In her dreams, the creek ran full and clear. The grass grew green and thick. The cattle grew fat and healthy. And she wasn't alone. But then she'd wake up and it would be hot and dry and silent again. Just another day to survive. Just another day of choosing over and over to stay. What Rachel didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that someone was watching her. Someone who'd seen her hauling water in the brutal sun, fixing fences alone, refusing to give up. Someone who understood exactly what it took to stay when leaving would be so much easier. Someone who'd already decided that a woman that stubborn, that strong, that loyal to the land, was worth staying for too. It was the dust that caught her attention first. Rachel was hauling feed bags from her truck to the barn when she noticed it. A thin brown cloud rising in the distance, coming from the direction of the old Peterson ranch. She stopped mid-step, shielding her eyes from the sun, watching that dust drift and settle. That was strange. The Peterson place had been empty for over a year. The bank had foreclosed on it after old Mr. Peterson died and his kids didn't want it. Rachel had walked through it once, months ago, feeling like a ghost wandering through someone else's abandoned dreams. Broken windows, doors hanging crooked, weeds growing up through the porch, but now someone was there, or at least someone was driving around there. She saw the dust clouds on and off for the next 3 days, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late afternoon, always in the same area, around the old Peterson spread. Her curiosity grew with each sighting, but so did her caution. Out here, alone, she'd learned to be careful. Most people who came to abandoned properties weren't up to anything good. On the 4th day, she saw something different. Not just dust from a vehicle, but a figure on horseback. Way off in the distance, barely visible, but definitely there. Someone riding the fence line like they owned the place. Maybe they did own the place. Maybe the bank had finally sold it. The thought made something flutter in her chest. Hope? Fear? She wasn't sure. Another person living in the valley would mean she wasn't alone anymore. But it would also mean change, and she'd gotten used to things being exactly as they were, hard as that was. A week passed. The dust clouds continued. She'd see that distant rider almost every day now, always working, always busy, never coming close enough for her to get a good look. It was driving her crazy. Finally, on a Tuesday afternoon when she'd finished her work early for once, Rachel made a decision. She was going to drive over there and see who it was. What was the worst that could happen? If they were trouble, well, she had her father's old rifle in the truck. Not that she'd ever had to use it on anything but coyotes, but it was there. The drive to the Peterson place was only about 3 miles, but the road was rough. She hadn't been this way in months, and it showed. Potholes everywhere, weeds growing up through the middle. She bounced along slowly, her truck protesting every bump. As she got closer, she could see that someone had definitely been working. The gate that used to hang sideways was now repaired and standing straight. Fresh tire tracks led into the property, and there, pulled up next to the old barn, was a dusty black pickup truck that had seen plenty of hard use. Rachel parked a respectful distance away and climbed out of her truck slowly, making sure she was visible. No sudden movements. "Out here, you announced yourself. Hello?" she called out. "Anyone here?" For a moment, nothing. Just the wind and the creak of old wood. Then a figure emerged from behind the barn and Rachel's heart did a little skip. He was tall, probably early 30s, wearing faded jeans, a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a cowboy hat that had seen better days. He had a hammer in one hand and the kind of tan that came from working outside all day. Every day. When he saw her, he stopped and pushed his hat back a bit, revealing a face that was more interesting than handsome, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. "Afternoon," he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. He didn't sound threatening, just curious. "Hi," Rachel said, suddenly feeling awkward. "I'm Rachel. I live over at the Hartfield place about 3 miles that way." She pointed vaguely east. He walked closer and she noticed he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. He stuck out his hand when he reached her. "Dylan Cooper. Pleased to meet you." His handshake was firm, his palm calloused. A working man's hand. "I've been seeing dust clouds over here for a couple weeks," Rachel said. "Figured I should come see who my new neighbor is." "If you are my neighbor, that is." "I am," Dylan said with a small smile. "Bought this place from the bank about a month ago. Been trying to get it livable again. It's quite a project." Rachel looked around at the property. The house looked even worse up close. "That's putting it mildly. This place has been empty a while." "Yeah, I can tell." He took off his hat and ran a hand through dark hair that was sweaty from work. "But I've brought worse places back to life. It'll just take time and a lot of sweat." "Why this place?" The question came out before Rachel could stop it. "I mean, why here? Why now? Everyone's been leaving." Dylan was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. "That's exactly why. Land's cheap when nobody wants it. And I've got my reasons for wanting to be somewhere quiet." There was a story there Rachel could tell, but she didn't push. She understood about privacy. "Well," she said, "welcome to the valley. I should warn you, it's just us out here now. Everyone else cleared out." "I know," Dylan said, and something in the way he said it made Rachel look at him more closely. "Saw you working your place. You've got cattle. 15 head, down from 50 a few years ago." She didn't know why she was telling him this. "The drought's been rough, I noticed." He gestured toward his barn. "I'm hoping to get some livestock once I get the fences repaired. Maybe we could help each other out sometimes. You know, neighbor stuff." The word neighbor felt strange and wonderful at the same time. Rachel had gotten so used to being alone that the idea of having someone nearby, someone who might actually understand this life, was almost overwhelming. "That would be good," she said, and meant it. "I mean, it's been pretty quiet around here, I bet." Dylan's eyes were kind. "Tell you what, I'm about to take a break. Got some coffee in a thermos. You want a cup? We could talk about what needs doing around here." Rachel hesitated. She should get back. She had chores. But the truth was, her chores could wait an hour, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd had coffee with another human being who wasn't a waitress in town taking her order. "Sure," she said. "That sounds nice." They sat on what remained of the Peterson porch drinking coffee from a shared thermos and talked. Really talked. About the land. About the drought. About the cattle market and feed prices and the fact that the hardware store in town had closed. Dylan told her he'd grown up on a ranch in Montana, lost it when his father died and the debts came due. He'd spent the last 10 years working other people's land, saving every penny, waiting for the right opportunity. When he saw this place listed for next to nothing, he jumped on it. "People think I'm crazy," he said. "Buying land nobody wants in a valley that's dying." "Yeah," Rachel said softly. "I know that feeling." Their eyes met, and there was understanding there. Recognition. Two people who'd chosen the hard road when an easier one was right there in front of them. The sun was getting lower when Rachel finally stood up to leave. "I should get back." "Evening chores, of course." Dylan stood too. "Hey, Rachel." "Thanks for coming by. It's nice knowing I'm not completely alone out here." She smiled, a real smile that felt strange on her face because it had been so long. "Same here, Dylan, same here." As she drove home, Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in months. Lighter. The loneliness that had been pressing down on her like a physical weight had lifted just a little. Not gone, but easier to carry. She had a neighbor now. Someone who understood. Someone who'd chosen to stay too. That night, her journal entry was different. July 3rd. Met the new neighbor. His name's Dylan. He's fixing up the Peterson place. We had coffee and talked about ranching. It was the first real conversation I've had in so long I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Maybe things are looking up. Maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. She lay in bed that night, and for the first time in forever, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. Somewhere out there, 3 miles away, someone else was lying in bed in an old house, betting everything on a piece of land that everyone else had given up on. Two stubborn fools, she thought, and found herself smiling in the dark. But she had no idea just how much that chance meeting was about to change everything. The partnership started small and practical, the way most good things do. 3 days after their first meeting, Rachel was wrestling with a stubborn section of fence when Dylan's truck pulled up. He climbed out with a toolbox and a post hole digger. "Saw you out here from my ridge," he called out. "Thought you might need an extra pair of hands." Rachel's first instinct was to say no, that she could handle it herself. She'd been handling everything herself for so long that accepting help felt like admitting weakness. But then she looked at the fence, at the 3 more posts she still had to set before dark, and swallowed her pride. "Yeah," she said. "That would be great, actually." They worked side by side in the hot sun, not talking much at first. But there was something comfortable about the silence between them. It wasn't the heavy, lonely silence she'd grown used to. It was the easy quiet of two people focused on the same task, understanding each other without needing words. When they finished, Dylan refused her offer of payment. "Neighbors help neighbors," he said simply. "Besides, I'm going to need your help soon enough. That barn of mine needs a new roof, and that's definitely a 2-person job." And that's how it started. An unspoken agreement, a back and forth that made both their lives just a little bit easier. A week later, Rachel showed up at Dylan's place with her truck and a ladder. "Heard you needed help with a roof," she said. Dylan's face broke into a genuine smile. "You heard right. They spent 2 days on that roof, pulling off old shingles, hammering down new ones. The work was hard and hot, but somehow it didn't feel as hard when you had someone to share it with." They'd take breaks in the shade, passing a water bottle back and forth, and slowly, conversation started to flow more easily. "So why ranching?" Rachel asked during one of these breaks. "I mean, you could have done anything. Gone anywhere. Why choose this life?" Dylan was quiet for a moment, staring out at the horizon. "My dad used to say that land was the only thing that couldn't lie to you. You put in the work, treat it right, and it'll treat you right back. Maybe not on your schedule, but eventually." He looked at her. "After he died and we lost everything, I spent years feeling lost. Working jobs that meant nothing. Living in places that didn't feel like home. Then one day I realized I wasn't living at all. I was just existing. So I decided to get back to what mattered." Rachel understood that more than he knew. "My parents thought I was crazy for staying." "They still think that. Are you?" Dylan asked. "Crazy, I mean?" She laughed. "Probably. But it's my kind of crazy. I'd rather be crazy here than sane somewhere that doesn't feel like home." "I'll drink to that," Dylan said, raising his water bottle. As summer stretched on, they fell into a rhythm. Dylan would show up at Rachel's place to help with the heavier work, the stuff that was dangerous or nearly impossible to do alone. Rachel would head over to his spread when she knew he was tackling big projects. They'd work together, then sit on whatever porch was closest, sharing whatever lunch they'd brought, talking about everything and nothing. Rachel learned that Dylan was good with machinery, the kind of person who could look at a broken engine and just understand what was wrong. He fixed her ancient tractor, which had been sitting useless for months because she couldn't afford a mechanic. "There," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "Should run smooth now. Just needed a little love and some new parts I had lying around. Dylan, I can't just take parts from you. You're not taking anything. I'm investing in my neighbor's success. Your cattle need that tractor for feeding. Your cattle survive, you survive. You survive, I'm not alone out here, see? Selfish motives all around." But there was nothing selfish about it, and they both knew it. Dylan learned that Rachel was stubborn as a mule, which he said with affection. She'd work until she literally couldn't stand anymore, pushing herself past any reasonable limit. More than once he'd found her still working at sunset, limping around on legs that were clearly screaming at her to stop. "You're going to hurt yourself," he'd tell her. "I'm fine," she'd insist. "Rachel, you're limping. It's just a little sore. I'll ice it tonight." He started showing up earlier on days he knew she had hard work planned, just to make sure she didn't overdo it alone. She pretended to be annoyed, but secretly, she was grateful. The coffee breaks became a regular thing. Whoever was visiting the other's property would bring a thermos, and they'd sit and talk while the sun climbed higher in the sky. Sometimes they talked about ranching and the practical matters of keeping their places running. Other times the conversations went deeper. "You ever think about what happens if it doesn't rain?" Rachel asked one day, voicing the fear that kept her up at night. "I mean, really doesn't rain. Not this year. Not next year." "Every day," Dylan admitted. "But I try not to let that fear make my decisions. We do what we can do. We prepare, we work hard, and we hope. That's all anyone can do. Hope feels like a luxury sometimes." "Nah," Dylan said, looking at her steadily. "Hope's a necessity. It's the thing that keeps you going when everything else says quit. You've got hope, Rachel. That's why you're still here." She thought about that a lot afterward. Maybe he was right. Maybe hope wasn't just wishful thinking. Maybe it was the steel in her spine that refused to bend. By mid-August, they'd settled into a comfortable partnership. They knew each other's schedules, knew when the other needed help without having to ask. Dylan knew that Rachel checked her cattle first thing every morning, so that's when he'd show up if he was going to show up. Rachel knew that Dylan worked on his fences in the late afternoon when it was slightly cooler, so she'd time her visits accordingly. But it was more than just work. They'd started looking forward to seeing each other. Rachel would catch herself smiling as she drove over to Dylan's place, anticipating their conversations. Dylan would finish his own work faster so he could head over to Rachel's, telling himself it was just being a good neighbor, but knowing it was more than that. One evening, after they'd spent the day repairing Rachel's barn door, Dylan didn't leave right away. They sat on her porch as the sun set, neither one wanting the day to end. "This is nice," Rachel said softly, "having someone to talk to, having someone who understands." "Yeah," Dylan agreed. "It is. I didn't realize how lonely I was until I wasn't anymore." She looked at him. "Thank you for that. Thank you for letting me help. For accepting that you don't have to do everything alone." The silence between them felt different now, charged somehow. Rachel felt her heart beating a little faster, and she didn't quite know what to do with that feeling. Dylan stood up slowly like he was reluctant to go. "I should head back. Early day tomorrow." "Right, yeah, me too." But he didn't move toward his truck right away. He just stood there looking at her in the fading light, and Rachel had the sudden, terrifying thought that he might be about to say something that would change everything. Instead, he just smiled. "Good night, Rachel." "Good night, Dylan." She watched his truck disappear down the road and sat there on the porch long after the taillights faded. Something was shifting between them, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. She'd gotten so good at being alone, at depending only on herself. The idea of needing someone, of caring about someone enough that losing them would hurt, terrified her. But it was already too late, wasn't it? She already cared. She already needed these conversations, these shared moments, these coffee breaks that made the hard days bearable. That night, she wrote in her journal, August 18th, fixed the barn door with Dylan's help. "We're becoming real friends. It feels good and scary at the same time. I keep telling myself it's just neighborly help, just practical partnership. But I'm lying. There's something more here, something growing, and I don't know what to do with it. Part of me wants to run from it. Part of me wants to run toward it. Mostly I just want to keep having coffee on the porch and pretending everything is simple when nothing is simple at all." She lay in bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the house but feeling different, less alone, more hopeful, and yes, a little bit scared of what that hope might cost her if things went wrong. September arrived with cooler mornings, though the afternoons were still brutally hot. The drought continued, relentless as ever, but something had changed for Rachel. The weight of it all felt different now. Lighter somehow, even though nothing about the actual situation had improved. It was because of Dylan, of course. She could admit that to herself, even if she wasn't ready to say it out loud. He'd become part of her daily life in a way that felt both natural and miraculous. Some mornings she'd walk out to feed the cattle and find him already there, having shown up early to help. He never made a big deal of it, just handed her a cup of coffee from his thermos and got to work. "You don't have to keep doing this," she'd tell him. "I know," he'd say. "Want to anyway." And what could she say to that? They'd started eating lunch together most days, alternating between properties. Sometimes it was sandwiches eaten standing up in the shade of a barn. Sometimes one of them would cook something simple, and they'd sit at an actual table like civilized people. Those were Rachel's favorite times, when they'd linger over the meal, talking about everything from cattle breeding to their favorite books to memories of their childhoods. "I used to have this old dog," Dylan told her one afternoon, leaning back in his chair at her kitchen table. "His name was Duke, and he was the ugliest, orneriest animal you ever saw. But he loved my dad. Followed him everywhere. When we lost the ranch and had to rehome the animals, giving up Duke about killed me." "Where'd he go?" Rachel asked softly. "Family friend took him. Good people. I know he was happy." Dylan smiled, but there was sadness in it. "But I swore then that when I got my own place again, first thing I'd do was get a dog. Haven't yet, though." "Why not?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Guess I wanted to make sure I could really make this place work first. Didn't want to bring a dog into a situation that might fail." "You're going to make it work," Rachel said with certainty. "You're too stubborn not to." "Look who's talking." They smiled at each other across the table, and Rachel felt her heart do that little skip again. It was happening more and more lately, that flutter of feeling that was both wonderful and terrifying. One evening, Dylan stayed for dinner. Not just lunch, but actual dinner. Rachel had cooked a pot roast, something she hadn't done in months because cooking for one person felt depressing. But she'd done it today, and when Dylan's truck pulled up at 5 o'clock, she found herself hoping he'd stay. "That smells incredible," he said when he walked in. "It's just pot roast. Nothing fancy." "Rachel, I've been living on sandwiches and canned soup for months. This is fancy to me." They sat at the table as the light faded outside, eating slowly, talking about everything and nothing. Dylan told her about the time he'd worked on a ranch in Wyoming, where the owner swore his horses could predict the weather. Rachel told him about her grandmother, who used to bake pies for every family in the valley and knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. This place was different then, Rachel said, looking around the kitchen. Full of life. Full of people. Sometimes I can almost hear them, you know. All the dinners and celebrations and ordinary moments that happened in this room. "It's not empty now," Dylan said quietly. "We're here." The way he said "we" made Rachel's breath catch. We. Like they were a unit. Like they were something together. After dinner, they did the dishes side by side, and Rachel was acutely aware of how close he was standing. Close enough that their shoulders brushed when they moved. Close enough that she could smell the soap and sun on his skin. They ended up on the porch, as they often did, watching the stars come out. But tonight felt different. The air between them felt charged with something unspoken. "Can I ask you something?" Dylan said after a long, comfortable silence. "Sure. Are you happy? I mean, really happy? Out here alone, fighting this fight every day?" Rachel thought about it carefully. "I don't know if happy is the right word. Satisfied, maybe, purposeful, like my life means something. And lately," she paused, gathering courage. "Lately I've been happier than I've been in a long time." "Yeah?" His voice was soft. "Why's that?" She could feel him looking at her, but she kept her eyes on the stars. "I think you know why." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Rachel's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Rachel," Dylan said, and something in his voice made her finally turn to look at him. "I need to tell you something, and I hope it doesn't make things weird between us, but I can't not say it anymore." "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I didn't just randomly buy that property. I mean, I did buy it because it was available and cheap, but that's not the whole truth. I'd been watching this valley for months before I made the decision. And I saw you, working your land alone, refusing to give up, so damn strong and stubborn and brave. And I thought, if someone like that can stay and fight for this place, then maybe it's worth fighting for. Maybe I could make a life here. Rachel stared at him, her mind reeling. You came here because of me? Partly, mostly, I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated with himself. I came here because you gave me hope that it was possible, that someone could make it work. And then I got to know you, and it became about more than the land. It became about you. Her heart was racing. Dylan, you don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I just needed you to know. I value your friendship more than anything, and if that's all this can be, I'll take it. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel more. I'd be lying if I said I didn't look forward to seeing you every single day. That having coffee with you isn't the best part of my day every day. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were overwhelmed tears, grateful tears, scared tears, all mixed together. I feel it too, she whispered. And it terrifies me. Why? Because what if it doesn't work out? What if I let myself care and then you leave? Everyone leaves, Dylan. Everyone. And I don't think I could handle it if you left too. He moved closer, taking her hand gently. Rachel, look at me. She did, and in the starlight his eyes were steady and sure. I bought a ranch, he said. I sunk every penny I have into this place. I'm not going anywhere. Even if things between us went sideways, which I don't think they will, I'm still your neighbor. I'm still here. You're not getting rid of me that easy. A laugh bubbled up through her tears. You're crazy, you know that? Yeah, well, you're crazy too. That's why this works. They sat there holding hands on the porch, and Rachel felt something in her chest loosen. A knot she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. The fear of being alone. The fear of staying alone. Dylan hadn't promised her forever. He hadn't promised her easy. But he'd promised her that he was here, and for now that was enough. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I've been alone for so long. I don't know how to let someone in. We'll figure it out together, Dylan said. No rush, no pressure, just let's see where this goes, okay? Okay, Rachel said and meant it. They sat there until late, talking about nothing important and everything important all at once. When Dylan finally left, he squeezed her hand one more time. See you tomorrow? He asked. Yeah, Rachel said, smiling. See you tomorrow. That night, her journal entry was different from anything she'd written before. September 12th. Dylan told me how he really feels. I told him back. I'm scared and excited and confused and happy all at once. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if this will work. But for the first time in forever, I'm willing to try. I'm willing to hope for something more than just surviving. Maybe that's growth. Maybe that's healing. Or maybe I'm just falling for a cowboy who's as stubborn as I am. Either way, tomorrow suddenly feels different, brighter, full of possibility. She lay in bed with a smile on her face, and the silence of the house didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt peaceful, like the quiet before something beautiful begins. The storm hit on the first Tuesday of October, without warning and without mercy. Rachel had been watching the sky all afternoon. Dark clouds had been building on the horizon, heavy and threatening. At first she'd felt hopeful. Rain. Finally, actual rain. But as the clouds grew darker and the wind picked up, hope turned to worry. This didn't look like a gentle rain. This looked like trouble. By 5 o'clock, the sky had turned an eerie greenish gray. The air felt electric, charged with something dangerous. Rachel's cattle were restless, bunching together in the corner of the pasture, their eyes rolling white with fear. She'd seen animals act like this before, right before something bad happened. She tried calling Dylan, but the call wouldn't go through. The cell service out here was spotty at the best of times, and in weather like this, it was useless. She thought about driving over to his place to warn him, but even as she had the thought, the first drops started falling. Within seconds, it went from drops to sheets. Rain came down so hard she couldn't see 10 feet in front of her. Then came the hail. Not the small stuff, but chunks of ice the size of golf balls, hammering down on everything with brutal force. Rachel ran for the barn, her arms over her head, feeling the hail hit her back and shoulders like stones. Inside the barn, the noise was deafening. Hail pounded on the metal roof like 1,000 drums. The whole structure shook with the force of the wind. Rachel's heart was pounding. The barn roof. It had been patched and repaired a dozen times, but it was old. Too old. She heard a crack, then a terrible groaning sound. No, 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 she breathed. Part of the roof tore away with a shriek of metal. Rain poured through the hole, soaking the hay she'd worked so hard to store. Wind howled through the gap, making the whole barn feel like it might lift off its foundation. Rachel ran out into the storm, knowing she had to check on the cattle. The hail had stopped, but the rain was still coming down in torrents and the wind was worse than before. She could barely stand against it. Through the rain, she saw that part of her fence had come down. The cattle were starting to scatter, panicked and confused. If they got out, if they ran off in this storm, she might never find them all. Some could get hurt or killed. She was trying to drive them back, soaked to the bone and exhausted, when she saw headlights cutting through the rain. Dylan's truck came roaring up her driveway, moving way too fast for the conditions, sliding in the mud. He jumped out, already drenched, and ran toward her. "Rachel, are you okay?" "The fence is down," she shouted over the wind. "The cattle are getting out." They worked together in the driving rain, running back and forth, trying to turn the cattle back from the break in the fence. It was hard, exhausting work. The animals were terrified and didn't want to cooperate. Rachel slipped in the mud and went down hard on her knee. Dylan helped her up without a word, and they kept going. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, they got all the cattle secured in a corner of the pasture away from the break. Dylan used some old boards and wire from his truck bed to create a temporary patch on the fence. It wouldn't hold long, but it would hold until the storm passed. The barn was still groaning in the wind. They ran inside to assess the damage, and Rachel felt her heart sink. The hole in the roof was bigger than she'd thought. Half her hay was ruined. Water was everywhere. "We need to cover this," Dylan shouted over the noise. They found an old tarp and, working together, managed to get it secured over the worst of the hole. It was dangerous work, climbing up in the wind and rain, but they didn't have a choice. By the time they finished, they were both shaking with exhaustion and cold. The storm finally started to ease around midnight. The rain slowed to a steady pour, and the wind died down enough that things stopped flying around. Rachel and Dylan collapsed on hay bales inside the barn, too tired to even make it to the house. "Thank you," Rachel said, her teeth chattering. "I couldn't have done this without you." Dylan was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ground. When he finally looked at her, his expression was intense in a way she'd never seen before. "Rachel, I have to tell you something." "What?" She was suddenly nervous. His tone was too serious. "I didn't just happen to show up tonight. I was already on my way here before the storm hit. I'd been planning to come over anyway because I've been needing to say something to you for weeks now, and I kept chickening out." "Dylan, what are you talking about?" He stood up and started pacing, running his hands through his wet hair. "Remember when I said I came here partly because of you? That I'd seen you working your land and it inspired me? Yeah, that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." He stopped and looked at her directly. "I'd been driving through this valley for months before I made the decision. I was looking at properties, trying to decide if I was ready to take the risk. And I'd see you out there day after day, still fighting when everyone else had quit. And I was fascinated, not just impressed, but fascinated, by your strength, by your determination, by you." Rachel felt her breath catch. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I didn't buy that property for the land, Rachel. I bought it for you. I saw you from a distance and I thought, that's someone worth knowing. That's someone special. That's someone I need to meet. And then I did meet you. And getting to know you has been the best thing that's happened to me in years, maybe ever." "Dylan, let me finish," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tonight, when that storm hit, all I could think about was you. Whether you were safe, whether you needed help. I drove over here in conditions I had no business driving in. And you know what I realized? I realized I'm in love with you. I'm in love with your strength and your stubbornness and the way you care for those cattle like their family. I'm in love with your laugh and the way you look at the sunrise and how you never, ever give up. And I know it's fast and I know it might be too soon, but I can't keep pretending it's just friendship when it's so much more than that." Rachel sat there, stunned. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself, to say it was too much too fast. But a bigger part, a braver part, knew the truth. "I drove through a dangerous storm because I couldn't stand the thought of you facing it alone," Dylan continued. "I stayed here because you're here. Everything I do, every decision I make, it's all connected to you now. And I needed you to know that. I needed to finally be honest about why I'm really here. Tears were streaming down Rachel's face, mixing with the rainwater still dripping from her hair. "You're crazy," she whispered. "I know. You could have been hurt. That drive was dangerous. I know that too. Dylan." She stood up, facing him. "I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of this, of caring this much. Of needing someone. Of what happens if I let myself fall and then you're not there to catch me." He stepped closer, reaching out to gently cup her face in his hands. "I'm here, Rachel. I'm right here. And I'm not going anywhere. I bought land here. I put down roots. This is my home now, and you're a big part of why it's home." "I don't know how to do this," she said, but even as she said it, she was leaning into his touch. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But we'll figure it out together. We've figured out everything else together, haven't we?" Rachel looked into his eyes and saw nothing but honesty and hope and something that looked a lot like love. And she realized she was done fighting it. Done being afraid. Done pretending she didn't feel the same way. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been falling for you since the first day we had coffee on that porch. Maybe even before that. And it scares me to death, but I don't want to fight it anymore." Dylan's smile was bright enough to light up the dark barn. "Yeah? Yeah." He pulled her close, and she wrapped her arms around him, holding on tight. They stood there in the damaged barn, soaking wet and exhausted, and Rachel felt more at home than she'd felt in years. "We should probably get to the house," Dylan said eventually. "You're freezing. So are you. Then we'll be freezing together." They walked through the rain to the house hand in hand. Inside, Rachel made hot coffee while Dylan built a fire in the fireplace. They sat together on the couch, wrapped in blankets, slowly warming up. "Tomorrow's going to be a mess," Rachel said. "So much damage to repair." "Then we'll repair it," Dylan said simply. "Together." That word again. Together. It didn't sound scary anymore. It sounded perfect. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, Rachel felt at peace. She'd spent so long believing she had to be strong enough to handle everything alone, but maybe real strength was knowing when to let someone help, when to let someone in, when to admit that together was better than alone. She fell asleep on the couch, her head on Dylan's shoulder, listening to the rain and the fire and his steady heartbeat. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt completely, perfectly safe. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, as if the sky was trying to apologize for the violence of the night before. Rachel woke up on the couch, still wrapped in blankets, with Dylan asleep in the chair across from her. The fire had burned down to embers. For a moment, she just lay there watching him sleep. His face was peaceful, younger somehow. This man who'd driven through a dangerous storm just to make sure she was okay. This man who'd admitted he loved her in the middle of chaos and destruction. Her heart felt full and terrified at the same time. Dylan stirred, opening his eyes slowly. When he saw her watching him, he smiled. "Morning?" "Morning," she said softly. "Coffee?" "Always." They moved around the kitchen together, and it felt natural, easy, like they'd been doing this dance for years instead of just months. But as Rachel looked out the window at the damage from the storm, reality started to sink in. The barn roof was worse than she'd thought. The fence had multiple breaks now, not just the one they'd patched last night. Branches and debris were scattered everywhere. And when she went out to check, she found that the storm had damaged her well pump. "Again, this is bad," she said, standing in the muddy yard looking at everything that needed fixing. Dylan came to stand beside her. "We'll handle it, will we?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Dylan, look at this place. I can barely keep it running on a good day, and now this. The repairs alone will cost more money than I have. And winter's coming. What if I can't make it through? Then we'll figure something out." "That's not an answer." She turned to face him, frustration and fear bubbling up. "You can't just fix everything with optimism and hard work. Sometimes things are just too broken. Sometimes you have to admit defeat." He was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "Is that what you want to do? Admit defeat?" "I don't know what I want anymore," she said, and it was true. Everything felt confused and overwhelming. Dylan went back to his place late that morning, needing to check on his own storm damage. Rachel spent the day doing what she could, which wasn't much. Every repair she started revealed 2 more problems. It felt endless, impossible. 3 days passed in a blur of work and worry. Dylan came over when he could, but he had his own damage to deal with. They were still close, still caring. But there was a tension now that hadn't been there before. The weight of reality pressing down on their fragile new relationship. On the fourth day, Rachel drove into town for supplies. The hardware store might be closed, but the general store was still limping along. She needed wire for the fences and a part for the well pump if they had it. She was loading supplies into her truck when she ran into Mrs. Chen, who ran the post office. The older woman looked at Rachel with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "Got a letter for you," Mrs. Chen said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "Came yesterday, but I figured I'd give it to you in person." Rachel recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. Her stomach sank. She waited until she was back in her truck to open it. The letter was long, written in her mother's careful script, and it said everything Rachel had been afraid it would say. They'd heard about the storm. They'd heard about the damage. They were worried sick. "Please, Rachel, please consider coming to stay with them, just for the winter. Just to regroup." They had a spare room. She could find work in the city, save some money, and maybe in the spring, if she still wanted to, she could try again with the ranch. But both of them knew that if Rachel left, she wouldn't come back. The land would be sold. The ranch would be over. 4 generations of family history would end with her. The letter ended with the words that hurt most. "We love you, sweetheart. We just want you to be happy and safe. And we're not sure you can be either of those things there anymore." Rachel sat in the truck in the empty parking lot and cried, big, ugly, exhausted tears, because her mother was right. She wasn't safe there. The ranch was hanging by a thread, and every storm, every broken fence, every failed piece of equipment was pulling that thread tighter. And now there was Dylan to think about too. She'd finally let herself care about someone, and what if she couldn't make the ranch work? What if she had to leave? Would he understand? Would he resent her for giving up? Would they even survive it? She drove home slowly, the letter heavy in her pocket. When she got there, Dylan's truck was in the driveway. He was on her barn roof working on the repairs without her. "Dylan," she called up. "What are you doing?" He climbed down, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What's it look like?" "I'm fixing your roof. You can't just fix my roof without asking. Why not?" "It needs fixing. Because it's my ranch. My responsibility." She heard her voice rising but couldn't stop it. All the fear and frustration of the last few days was coming out. "I don't need you to rescue me." "I'm not trying to rescue you," Dylan said, his jaw tight. "I'm trying to help you. What's the difference?" "The difference is that I'm not doing this because I think you're weak. I'm doing it because I care about you and I don't want to see you struggle alone when I can help." Rachel pulled the letter from her pocket and held it up. "My parents want me to come stay with them. They think I should leave. Maybe for good." Dylan went very still. "What did you tell them?" "I didn't tell them anything yet. But Dylan, they might be right. Look at this place. Look at what I'm trying to hold on to. Maybe it's time to admit that I can't do this, that it's too hard, that I'm fighting a losing battle. Do you want to leave?" he asked quietly. "I don't know." The words burst out of her. "I don't know anything anymore. A month ago, my life was simple. Hard, but simple. I knew what I was fighting for. But now everything's complicated. Now I have you to think about, and what if I leave? What happens to us? Or what if I stay and I can't make it work and I end up resenting you because I gave up everything for something that failed anyway?" Dylan stepped closer, his expression serious. "Rachel, listen to me. I love you. I meant what I said during the storm. But I don't want you to stay just because of me. I need you to stay because you want to. Because you believe in this place. Because it's your choice, not mine. What if I don't know what I want?" "Then figure it out," he said, but his voice was gentle. "Take the time you need. Think about what you really want your life to look like. But don't run away because you're scared. And don't stay just because you're stubborn. Stay because your heart tells you it's right." He left after that, giving her space to think. Rachel stood in her yard, looking at the ranch that had been in her family for generations. The land her great-grandfather had claimed. The barn her father had built. The porch where her grandmother had spent countless evenings watching the sunset. But she also thought about the loneliness. The exhaustion. The constant worry about money and whether she'd make it through another season. Was that really living? Or was that just surviving? She thought about Dylan and the way he made her laugh. The way working beside him made the hard days easier. The way he looked at her like she was strong and capable and worth staying for. But was that enough to build a life on? Was love enough when everything else was falling apart? That night, Rachel sat at her kitchen table with a blank piece of paper in front of her, trying to write a response to her parents. She must have started a dozen times, but nothing felt right. Dear Mom and Dad, I'm coming home. No. Dear Mom and Dad, I'm staying. No. Dear Mom and Dad, I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe. But that didn't help anyone. She walked out to the porch and sat in her usual spot. The stars were out, brilliant and endless. She'd sat here so many nights alone with her thoughts. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like a turning point. Rachel closed her eyes and tried to listen to her heart the way Dylan had suggested. What did she really want? She wanted to stop being afraid. She wanted to believe that things could work out. She wanted to trust that love was worth the risk. She wanted to wake up every morning and feel excited about the day instead of dreaded. She wanted to build something with Dylan, something real and lasting. But she also wanted to honor her family's legacy. She wanted to prove that she could make it work. She wanted to see this land bloom again when the rains finally came. Were those things possible? Could she have both? Could she keep the ranch and have love too? Could she be strong enough to handle whatever came next? The answer, she realized, wasn't about strength. It was about choice. She could choose to keep fighting, knowing it might not work out. She could choose to let Dylan help her, knowing that accepting help didn't make her weak. She could choose love while still holding on to her dreams. Or she could choose to walk away, to start fresh somewhere else, to build a different kind of life. Both choices were valid. Both choices were brave in their own way, but only one choice felt like home. Rachel opened her eyes and looked out at the land. Her land, and made her decision. Rachel woke up the next morning knowing exactly what she needed to do. The sun was barely up when she got dressed and headed out to her truck. There was someone she needed to see and she couldn't wait another minute. Dylan's ranch looked peaceful in the early morning light. His truck was parked outside, which meant he was home. Rachel felt her heart hammering as she knocked on his door. He answered in jeans and a t-shirt, his hair still messy from sleep. When he saw her, his expression was cautious, like he was afraid of what she might say. Rachel, you okay? Can we talk? Can I come in? Of course. His kitchen was simple but clean. They sat at his table with coffee neither of them was really drinking, and Rachel took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you said, about figuring out what I want. Dylan waited, his eyes on her face. I spent all night going over it in my head. The ranch, my family's history, my parents wanting me to leave, you, everything. She paused, gathering her thoughts, and I realized something. I've been so focused on not giving up, on being strong enough to handle everything alone, that I forgot what I was really fighting for. What were you fighting for? Dylan asked gently. I thought I was fighting for the land, for my family's legacy, for this idea of proving I could do it. But that's not the whole truth. She looked at him directly. I was fighting to not be alone, to matter, to have a place where I belonged. And the funny thing is, the land gave me that for a while. But lately it's been you who makes me feel like I belong. You make me feel like I matter, like I'm not just surviving, but actually living. Dylan reached across the table and took her hand. You do matter. You always have. I know that now. And I've made my decision. She squeezed his hand. I'm staying. Not because I'm too stubborn to quit. Not because I'm afraid of disappointing anyone. I'm staying because this is my home, and because I want to build a life here. But I'm done trying to do it all alone. I need help, Dylan. I need you. Not just for the work, but for everything. And that's scary as hell, but it's also the truest thing I know. The smile that spread across Dylan's face was like sunrise. You're staying. I'm staying. But I need to do it smarter. I'm going to talk to the bank about a loan for repairs. I'm going to reach out to some of the agricultural programs about drought assistance. I'm going to actually ask for help instead of pretending I don't need it. And I'm going to let myself be happy, Dylan, with you, if you still want that. If I still want that.
He laughed, standing up and pulling her into his arms.
Rachel, I've wanted that since the moment I met you. Hell, since before I met you. They held each other in his kitchen, and Rachel felt something loosen in her chest. Relief, hope, joy, all mixed together in a way that made her eyes sting with tears. Come with me, Dylan said suddenly, pulling back. There's something I want to show you. They drove in his truck to the fence line between their properties. Rachel had been out here dozens of times, but today something was different. Dylan had been working on something. He parked and led her to a spot where he'd clearly been doing construction. New fence posts, fresh wire, and right in the middle, a wide gate that was currently open. "What's this?" Rachel asked. "I've been working on it for a few weeks," Dylan said. "I wanted to surprise you, but after everything that happened, I wasn't sure if you'd want it anymore. But now," he turned to face her, "this gate connects our properties, our ranches. If you want, we could run them together, combine our herds, share the work, share the costs, make it easier on both of us." Rachel stared at the gate, understanding what he was really offering. Not just a practical solution, but a symbol, a bridge between their lives. "But even more than that," Dylan continued, "I've been thinking about the future, about what we're building here. And I know it's fast, and I know we're still figuring things out, but Rachel, I want to build it with you. Not just the ranches, but a life, a real life. Together." "Dylan, I'm not asking you to marry me right now," he said quickly, though there was a hint of something in his eyes that suggested he'd thought about it. "I'm just asking you to trust me, to trust us, to believe that we can make this work together, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Rachel walked through the gate, standing in the space between their properties. From here, she could see both ranches, both dreams, and maybe together they could become one bigger dream. "I trust you," she said, turning back to him, "and I trust us. So yes, let's do this. Let's combine the ranches. Let's work together. Let's build something real." Dylan walked through the gate to meet her, and when he kissed her, Rachel felt like she was finally completely home. They spent the rest of the morning making plans, excited, hopeful plans about how to manage the combined ranches, where to run the cattle, how to split the work. They talked about applying for grants together, about maybe diversifying into other crops or livestock, about all the possibilities that opened up when you weren't facing everything alone. "We should celebrate," Dylan said as the sun climbed higher. "This is a big deal." "How should we celebrate? We don't exactly have a lot of options out here." Dylan grinned. "I've got an idea." That evening, he showed up at Rachel's place with his truck bed full of supplies. Wood for a bonfire, steaks to grill, even a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. They built the fire together in the yard between the house and barn. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they cooked dinner and talked about everything and nothing. "You know what I realized?" Rachel said, watching the flames dance. "This is the first time in years that I've felt truly happy. Not just content or determined or surviving. Actually happy." "Me too," Dylan said. "And you know what else?" "Look at the sky." Rachel looked up. The clouds that had been gathering all day were thick and dark, but they looked different from the storm clouds. "These looked promising. Is that—" "I think it might actually rain," Dylan said. "Real rain. The kind that soaks in and helps, not the kind that destroys." They sat by the fire as the first drops started to fall, gentle, steady drops that whispered rather than screamed. The kind of rain the land had been begging for. The kind that would soak deep into the earth and bring life back to dying things. Rachel tilted her face up to the sky, letting the rain kiss her cheeks. She started to laugh, and Dylan joined her. They stood up and danced in the rain like kids celebrating this gift from the heavens. "It's really raining," Rachel said, spinning around with her arms outstretched. "After all this time, it's really raining." Dylan caught her mid-spin and pulled her close. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking them both, but neither of them cared. "I stayed for you," he said softly, his forehead pressed against hers. "When everyone else left, when it seemed crazy to stay, I stayed because of you. Because watching you fight for this place made me believe it was worth fighting for. Because you gave me hope when I'd forgotten what hope felt like." Rachel felt tears mixing with the rain on her face. "I'm so glad you did. I'm so glad you stayed. I'll keep staying," Dylan promised. "For as long as you'll have me. Through droughts and storms. Through good seasons and bad. I'm here, Rachel. I'm not going anywhere." She kissed him then, with the rain pouring down around them and the fire crackling nearby. It felt like a promise. Like a beginning. Like everything she'd been afraid to hope for finally coming true. They went inside eventually, dripping wet and laughing. Rachel made hot chocolate while Dylan built a fire in the fireplace. They sat together on the couch, wrapped in blankets, listening to the rain drum on the roof. "I should write to my parents," Rachel said. "Let them know I'm staying. Let them know I'm okay. Better than okay." "Tell them about us," Dylan suggested. "I will. I'll tell them I found someone who understands. Someone who sees this place the way I do. Someone who makes the hard days easier and the good days better." She looked at him. I'll tell them I found my partner. Partners, Dylan said, smiling. I like the sound of that. That night, Rachel wrote in her journal one more time. October 15th. Everything has changed. The rain came finally, and it feels like a new beginning. Dylan and I are combining the ranches. We're going to work together. Build something together. I'm not alone anymore, and I don't have to be strong enough to handle everything by myself. We can be strong together. Mom and Dad will understand eventually. They'll see that I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. Really living. And it's because I stopped being afraid to let someone in. It's because I met a cowboy who was stubborn enough to stay. Even when staying seemed crazy, he stayed for me, and now I'm staying for us. For the life we're going to build. For the dreams we're going to chase. For the love that's going to carry us through whatever comes next. She closed the journal and looked out the window at the rain. It was still coming down, steady and sure, soaking into the thirsty earth. Tomorrow, she and Dylan would check on the cattle together. They'd assess the damage from the storm and make plans for repairs. They'd start the hard work of combining their operations and building something new. But tonight, she just sat and listened to the rain and felt grateful. Grateful for the land that had taught her to be strong. Grateful for the loneliness that had taught her what really mattered. Grateful for the cowboy who'd shown up when she needed him most and whispered the words that changed everything.